Chapter 2: The Philosophical Notions of the Human Persons. Audio recorded by Mr. Vidal. Lesson 1: Oriental Conceptions of Man. Oriental philosophy, that is, the philosophy that originated in the East, has its own conception of man. The two main origins of Oriental philosophy are India and China. From India emerged Hinduism and Buddhism, and from China, Taoism and Confucianism. Islam is a religion that emerged also from the East, but has a different conception. While these are all Oriental philosophies, these have different conceptions of man. The succeeding discussions provide an overview of these common conceptions. Man in Hinduism. The Hindu concept of the human person can be seen in their religious and philosophical doctrines, which are found in their sacred texts, especially the Vedas and Upanishads. The Vedas are the oldest extant literary works of the Aryan people, the people of ancient India. The Upanishads are considered as the end of the Vedas. The term Veda means knowledge in Sanskrit. The Upanishads contain the teachings and concepts of different ancient Indian thinkers. The concept of the human person is closely related to his or her relationship with the whole of reality. Reality can be interpreted through the notions of the Brahman and Atman. For the Hindu, the Brahman is the ultimate and underlying reality, while the Atman is the individual reality. Everything is Brahman. Everything, or the totality of what one sees and knows, is Brahman. But one does not really see or exactly knows the Brahman or the totality of reality because it is really beyond one's understanding. What one sees and knows are specific and concrete realities. This specific or concrete aspect of reality is Atman. Think of the air that fills the environment. We do not really see it, but we know that it is everywhere. The Brahman is like that. But when one fills the balloon with air, then he or she can know the specific air inside the balloon. The Atman is like that. When one pops the balloon, the air inside it escapes and becomes one with the air outside. The air inside the balloon is the Atman, and the air outside the balloon is the Brahman. The human person is part of reality. He or she is a part or one with the Brahman, but he or she is also a concrete and individual reality. Therefore, he or she is also an Atman. The ultimate goal of the human person is to be one with the Brahman and reach nirvana. In order to do this, the human person purify himself or herself and detach oneself from the world. Nirvana is attained when one is released or liberated from the earthly life. This is called moksha. If he or she does not attain this, then he or she is reincarnated and born again. The cycle of death and rebirth is called samsara, and one can attain a release from the samsara through enlightenment. Enlightenment starts with the understanding, that is, that this world is an illusion or maya. A person should not cling to this world as everything in this world is temporary. Human action is governed by law, which is karma. The law of karma states that good action results in a positive outcome, Bad action results in a bad outcome. Karma affects, therefore, the cycle of samsara. If we do good things, we will have a better in the next life until we reach liberation from this earthly life. Hinduism recognizes three possible paths to moksha or salvation. These paths or methods of attaining salvation are called yogas, and they were taught by the sages. The first method is called karma yoga. Karma, as was mentioned, pertains to action. Karma yoga is a way of attaining salvation through good deeds or good action, such as fulfilling one's duties to the family and to society. By doing good deeds or good action, one overcomes the weight of bad karma which may have been obtained from doing a bad deed. The second method of attaining salvation is called Jnana Yoga. Jnana means knowledge. This is a way of attaining salvation through knowledge. The basic principle of this method of attaining knowledge is that the cause of one's suffering and bondage is ignorance. Because of ignorance, one considers the world as a permanent reality, and therefore he or she clings to it. A person attaches himself or herself to it. But the world is only temporary, and it is just an illusion. What is permanent is the Brahman, the ultimate reality. Because of ignorance, one can also see himself or herself as a separate individual self. But people are part of the universal self, which is the Brahman. Because of such ignorance, one can also see himself or herself as a separate individual self. But people are part of the universal self, which is the Brahman. Because of such ignorance, one cannot escape the cycle of birth and rebirth, and therefore cannot attain salvation. So, to attain salvation, one must gain knowledge. Knowledge that the world is just an illusion, and that the selves are one with the Brahman. It is the same ignorance that also causes one's bad actions to result in bad karma. A person achieves salvation when he or she realizes his or her identity with Brahman. This is achieved through deep meditation, often as a part of the discipline of yoga. The third method is called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti is devotion, so Bhakti Yoga is salvation through devotion. Many common people, especially in India, like or prefer this method. Devotion satisfies the individual's longing for more emotional and personal approach to religion, especially with the many gods and goddesses in Hinduism. By way of devotion or bhakti, a person attaches himself to the gods or goddesses who are manifestations of the Brahman. Such devotion is similar to the devotion of the Christians to God and the saints. Buddhist Conception of Man. The development of the Buddhist teachings can be traced to the life of its founder, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. The life of Siddhartha Gautama is a constitutive part of its teachings. The history of Buddhism is based on the story of Gautama's spiritual journey from the bondage of suffering to enlightenment. Just like Christianity, the Buddhist teachings and way of life are based on the life and spiritual journey of its founder. Through his spiritual journey, Gautama found the path to enlightenment. leading from the path of pain, of suffering, and rebirth toward the path of enlightenment. He became known as the Buddha, which means awakened one. Siddhartha was a prince who enjoyed the luxury of life. He was protected by his father inside the palace and was ordered not to see the reality of the real world outside. But when he was able to travel outside the palace, he saw the suffering happening outside the palace. So he decided to leave the palace and search for a way to escape the inevitability of suffering and such as death, old age, and pain. Siddhartha first studied the life of religious men. However, this did not provide him with an answer to how to escape the inevitability of suffering. One day, Siddhartha encountered an Indian ascetic who encouraged him to follow the ascetic life, a life of extreme self denial and discipline. He also practiced meditation but realized that attaining the highest meditative states was not enough. Finally, he abandoned the strict lifestyle of self denial and asceticism, but did not return to the pampered luxury of his early life. Instead, he pursued the middle way, a life which is neither in luxury nor poverty. The Buddhist teaching about the human person is centered on the right understanding of reality in order to attain enlightenment. The Buddha believed that because of one's nature, human beings have some objective features, that is, common or general features just like the universe that one can recognize. Because of this one because of this, one is capable of attaining salvation. One comes to this realization after meditating for a long time. Buddha himself did this under the Bodhi tree. So, after 49 days of meditation, he was awakened to a new understanding of the nature of the human life as the Buddha or the enlightened one. Gautama saw himself and all life as part of an unending process of change. Life and the universe form a great chain of being through which all things take a form of existence and then transforms into another through interconnection with other things. The whole universe is composed of inseparable parts of various kinds of life which are interconnected, all depending on each other and moving from one form to another. After realizing the truth about life and reality, the Buddha reached nirvana or the state of bliss and detachment from the physical world. For Buddhism, nirvana is a state of emptiness or nothingness. It is a state of bliss where there is no individuality, separateness, discrimination, or intellectualizing. This is the state pure consciousness, the state of emptiness. The essence of the Buddhist teaching is contained in the Four Noble Truths. One of these truths is there is suffering. Because there is a cause of suffering, there is a cessation or end to suffering. The truth about suffering is it is like a disease. Its origin is like the cause of the disease. Cessation is like the cure of the disease. The path is like the medicine. The Buddha is often compared to a doctor who identifies the problem and the cause of the problem of the body. Then he prescribes the cure. In the first two noble truths, he identifies the problem, which is suffering, and then identifies its cause, which is ignorance. The third truth is the realization that there is a cure. And the fourth truth is there is a recommendation for the cure. According to the Buddha, the cure of suffering is the Eightfold Path. Through this prescription, one can achieve a release from suffering. Man in Taoism. Taoism's concept of man is based on its understanding of the whole of the universe, which follows certain universal and unchanging laws. The way of the Tao is universal, and since a person is part of this universe, he or she therefore must follow the way of the Tao. According to Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher and writer who is regarded as the author of the Taoist text, Tao Te Ching, the universe, viewed holistically, expresses harmony, purpose, order, and calm power. But when one attempts to separate things just to understand the parts without understanding the whole, what results are error, suffering, and unhappiness. Lao Tzu explains the sense of the ultimate underlying great principle, rule, or cause of the way of all things. He observes that the laws that govern them are not themselves changeable, although the things that are ever changeable are changing. These laws are called invariables, which come from the Chinese word chang, which could also be translated as eternal or abiding. Man, as part of the universe, must understand this invariable law of nature. According to Lao Tzu, to be enlightened is to know the invariable law of nature. Among the laws that govern the change in nature or things, the most fundamental is that which states when a thing reaches one extreme, it reverts from it. The man who comprehends the invariable and relies upon on it for his or her action does not follow his or her own partial opinion and therefore without prejudice. Because the Tao is all pervading and unfailing. The man who comprehends and relies on the invariable may likewise become all pervading and unfailing. Thus, he or she will not fail throughout his or her lifetime. The understanding and practice of this invariable law is called practicing enlightenment. The enlightenment man or the enlightened man associates the Tao with spontaneity and creativity. He or she frees himself or herself from selfishness and desire and appreciates simplicity. From the general theory, which states that reversing in the movement of the Tao comes the Wu Wei theory. According to this theory, everything comes from the ultimate Wu or nothing, which is the unnamed or the invisible. The Tao consequently acts by non acting. Wu Wei is translated literally as having no activity or non action. But it does not actually mean complete absence of activity or doing nothing. It could mean lesser activity or doing less or acting without artificiality or arbitrariness. The goal of Wu Wei is to achieve a state of perfect equilibrium or alignment with Tao, revealing the soft and invisible power within all things and, as a result, obtain an irresistible form of soft and invisible power. Activities are like many other things. If one has too much of them, they become harmful rather than good. The purpose of doing something is to have something done or accomplished. If there is overdoing or if there would be excessive activity, The result may be worse than not having the thing done at all. Taoist philosophy recognizes that the universe already works harmoniously according to its own ways. As a person exerts his or her will against or upon the world, he or she disrupts the harmony that already exists. Man in Confucianism. The Confucian concept of the human person is centered on the proper conduct of a person in society. Hence, central to the Confucian teaching is the cultivation of the human virtues. According to the Chinese philosopher Confucius, every normal human being cherishes the aspiration to become a superior man. Confucius wanted his disciples to be more than a literati or Jew. He wanted them to be well rounded men, men who are not only literate but also useful to the state and the society. He was concerned about the total development of his disciples and the people. Confucius concerned himself with the people's individual development, which, he said, takes place within the context of human relationships. Ritual and filial piety are indeed the ways in which one should act toward others, but from an underlying attitude of humanness. The sage or the wise is the most ideal type of person, but it is difficult to become a sage, and not everyone can be a sage like Confucius. So, Confucius encouraged his followers to be a Jun Chu, or a gentleman. Any person can become a Jun Chu. The Jun Chu is second only to the sage. The Jun Chu lives a simple life and can live in poverty. He is loyal, obedient, and knowledgeable. A Junchu is also disciplined, hardworking, and does not engage in empty talk. Ang hirap ng Junchu. Jen, or human-heartedness, is a fundamental virtue of the Junchu. The doctrine of Jen or Ren is the first and foremost of the virtues of Confucian ethical system. Jen is a perfect virtue and is the cardinal principle of humanism, and it expresses the ideal of cultivating human relations, developing human faculties, cultivating one's personality, and upholding human rights. The man of Jen is a man of virtue. For the Junchu, it is the supreme virtue. The other main virtue in Confucianism is yi. Yi is outness of a situation. This means that everyone in the society has a certain thing which he or she needs to do. But this has to be done without ulterior motive. A righteous act is done without any selfish motive or intention. It implies an obligation or an imperative which is absolute and without conditions. Li, or propriety. Another of the main virtues of Confucianism is the code of the ritual, which embodies the essence of ancient culture. Although Li, translated as code or ritual, it means more than the Confucian tradition. It includes all forms of rituals, especially in connection with the proper conduct of the gentleman. While Li is a moral disposition to do good without any ulterior motive, Li, on the other hand, pertains to proper social behavior or conduct like filial piety, loyalty, and etc. If one has Li, then it will be easy for him or her to practice Li. Hence, a perfect man exemplifies the virtues or these virtues. Kamali pa ako ng dulo ha. A good description of the perfect man is one who combines the qualities of saint, scholar, and gentleman. The gentleman is expected to act as a model of good and moral conduct in the society like a saint. The perfect man, or the sage, cultivates himself morally, shows filial piety and loyalty like a gentleman, and helps in transforming the society and humanity like a scholar. The great exemplar of the perfect man is Confucius himself. Ironically, he was assigned or appointed to a high position in society. He could have demonstrated the general well being that would ensue if humane and responsible persons were able to rule and administer the state. If there is a perfect man of the Jun Chu, Confucius also admits that there are those who cannot follow the virtues of the perfect man or Junsu. The opposite of the Junsu is the Xiaoren. This word literally means small person. A Xiaoren is characterized as having shallowness of thinking, being egoistic and self interested, and being greedy and materialistic. Islamic conception of man. Islam is one of the major monotheistic religions in the world. Like the Jews and Christians, Muslims believe in one unique and incomparable God. Muslims address Allah, God, as Allah. The Quran, the holy book of Islam, which contains the message of Allah given to his Prophet Muhammad, asserts that Allah is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. He has always existed, and will always exist, and the entire cosmos of created beings depends on him and him alone for its existence. He does not depend on any of his creatures, but all his creatures depend on him for their existence and for their needs. Allah hears, sees, and knows everything perfectly. His knowledge encompasses all things. He knows what has happened, what will happen, and how it will happen. He determines everything such that no affair occurs in the whole world except by his will. Islam emphasized the importance of knowing oneself based on the divine source, the one who created him or her. Since the beginning, human persons have been trying to know themselves, and in their desire to know themselves, they have to follow the words of Allah and must obey His laws. Otherwise, they would lose themselves and become confused between two extremes: selfishness and worthlessness. Sometimes a person thinks highly of and regards himself or herself as the greatest in the society of which he or she is a member. He or she then becomes arrogant and oppressive and stops following the laws of Allah. But he or she could also consider himself or herself as weak and the most worthless being in this universe. This is why he or she lowers himself or herself down and submits to physical or material objects like the sun, the moon, and other beings other than Allah. Islamic understanding of man revolves around the origin and stages of his or her creation, his or her good attributes, his or her capacity to understand, his or her capacity to do good and avoid evil, his or her understanding of the purpose of his or her life, and his or her relation with the rest of the creation. According to the teaching of Islam, humans have two origins. First is the spiritual origin, where God created humans from dust before breathing life into them. The second is the biological origin wherein humans came from the womb of their mother. This reality expressed in the Quran is meant to remove the from persons any form of arrogance so that they should humble themselves and submit to Allah alone. This explains that persons come to this world through their mothers, but their ultimate origin is Allah. A person is indeed a privileged being because although Allah created him or her like any other creature, Allah made the whole of creation in the service of the person and put him on or her in charge of all his creation. This should motivate one to take control of what is around him or her and not to bow down before any of these objects. It is precisely because of this that a person is put in charge of all of Allah's creations. Therefore, he or she must not bow down to any of these creations except to Allah Himself. Allah also endowed humans with the capacity to distinguish and choose between good and evil. Allah gave humans the faculty that will enable them to differentiate good from evil. A person also has the freedom of will to choose between good and evil. With all these faculties, it becomes his or her goal in life to develop and elevate himself or herself toward a life of virtue. With all these faculties, he or she is able to learn and acquire knowledge. Allah has gifted humans with all the tools and the abilities that enable them to learn and acquire knowledge. Given all these privileges, humans have become responsible and accountable for the consequences of their deeds. Since humans were given all these privileges, Allah has raised them above the rest of creation and were entrusted with taking control of creation. This is why they must submit themselves to the law of Allah and only Him alone. The Islamic philosophers were influenced by the Greek philosopher Aristotle in their interpretation of their Islamic faith. Hence, while the Quran provides them with their theological doctrines, in order to interpret these doctrines rationally or philosophically, they relied on the philosophy of Aristotle. Natapos din. To sum up, the Hindu concept of the human person is closely related to his or her relationship with the whole of reality, which is interpreted through the notions of the Brahman and Atman. The Brahman is the ultimate and underlying reality, while the Atman is the individual reality. The individual man is an Atman. The Buddhist understanding of the human person is based on the spiritual journey from the pain of suffering to enlightenment of the Buddha. One basic truth of human existence is suffering, and one must understand that the cause of suffering and follow the path to the cessation of suffering and toward enlightenment. Taoism's concept of the human person is based on its understanding of the whole universe, which follows certain universal and unchanging laws. The way of the Tao is universal, and man, as part of this universe, must follow the way of the Tao. The enlightened human associates the Tao with spontaneity and creativity. He or she frees himself or herself from the selfishness and desire and appreciates simplicity. The Confucian concept of the human person is centered on the proper conduct of the person in society. He or she must cultivate the human virtues and aspires to become a superior man. The Confucian disciple must be more than a literati. He or she must be a well rounded, not only literate, but also useful to the state and the society. And lastly, Islamic understanding of the human person revolves around the origin and stages of his or her creation, good attributes, capacity to understand, capacity to do good and avoid evil, and understanding of the purpose of of his and his relation to the rest of creation. The reality of human person is expressed in the Quran, which contains the message of Allah given to Muhammad. I thank you.